Yo, what's up, y'all? It's the MMA Analyst back at it again. Here to do a topical type discussion. Myself and Chase, the Phantom UFC fan, have put together our own respective videos on this topic. This is my take on the topic. The topic is George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. What would happen if that fight were to ever go down? The reason I wanted to do a video about this was I've seen a lot of different talk and hype regarding this fight, the potential of it, who would win, what would go down, etc., etc. I've actually seen, the thought of the fight is a good fight, and it is a little bit intriguing, but I've seen some crazy stuff. Like, some of these guys just like, could GSP ever be the light heavyweight champion? And who would win in a straight wrestling match, George St. Pierre or Dan Henderson? Although those are absolutely ludicrous and mind-boggling that those are even questions, this one here is worth talking about. Those other ones ain't worth talking about. This is worth talking about. Here's my second video of today. Actually, my first one was before I went and did my Muay Thai and my Jiu-Jitsu 1 hour each. Toronto BJJ, what's up? Shout out. Anyways, let's get right down to it. George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. Here we go. First, could it happen? Maybe. But before we get into it, let's get a few things out of the way. Number one, the fight would be at 185 pounds for two reasons. Number one, Anderson Silva would die if he tried to cut to 170. Period. Number two, the UFC, Anderson Silva's friends, family, fans, and most importantly, Anderson Silva himself does not want to die. So that's about wraps it up right there. Number three, what belts would be at stake? Anderson Silva's middleweight belt would be at stake. That's it. It would be a middleweight title fight where George St. Pierre could be the first guy to win two belts and hold them simultaneously. It was similar to the exact same situation that George St. Pierre and BJ Penn were in, where BJ Penn could have been the lightweight champion and the welterweight champion at the same time. All right, next, what would happen? When would it happen? It would happen after a successful George St. Pierre versus Thiago Alves fight. Of course, George St. Pierre would have to come out the winner. It would happen after another maybe one or two fights from Anderson Silva. Also, Dana has made mention that it would likely happen on the next Super Bowl card. So basically, like I said before, it's same situation with George St. Pierre versus BJ Penn. Happened on Super Bowl, 2010, Super Bowl's going down, the Lions versus, whoever, who would win. This is where the fun comes, all right? Let's get right down to each fighter. Before I really get into, verse each other, let's just talk about each fighter alone. All right, George Rush St. Pierre. Basically, George St. Pierre is a world champion who dominates guys on the ground. Then he beats them up on the feet. And then after that, he tires them out. Then he switches his game up. He goes back and forth, confuses the hell out of the people. He crushes their heart. Then he crushes their face. And then eventually destroys their will and ability to fight back. And then basically he wins the fight. Sometimes they quit. Sometimes the ref jumps in. But that's what happens. That's what George St. Pierre does, at least recently. He definitely has been doing that since he got knocked out or TKO by Matt Serra. And he's definitely taken on this like complete fighter attitude where, I'm going to beat you up standing, I'm beat you up on the ground. I'll sub you if I can. I'll knock you out if I can. So, that's what he's doing with this whole complete fighter thing. He's stronger than everybody at 170 except for Thiago Alves. And on the feet, he has better striking than anybody other than Thiago Alves. What is not in question is he has the best MMA wrestling in MMA, and he also has cardio/stamina that can only be paralleled. It can't be topped. Like, you can't come into a fight against George St. Pierre with more cardio or better stamina. You could only be maybe equal, but you can't be better. The pressure that he puts on you, It's kind of like Clay Guida pressure, but when he puts that pressure on you, he puts on punishment. Whether it's ground and pound like old school Mark Coleman, or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tap you out. You know what I mean? Whatever. He's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's got a black belt in Kyokushin Karate. All right, these are his strengths. What are George St. Pierre's weaknesses? None. He has no weakness. Really, let's put it like this. Whenever somebody lists heart as your only weakness, not one of your weaknesses. Like if they're like, well, he's not good in wrestling and his jiu-jitsu's questionable and his heart is questionable. I'm not talking about that. When somebody says weakness and then it says heart, then that means there are no physical weaknesses, okay? And they have to dig deeper than physical to find a possible kink in the armor. So, George St. Pierre just goes out there and looks good everywhere, but what's he got to work on? Heart? I don't know. Right? All right. He has been beat in the past. He was TKO'd by a 5'6" Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, and he was tapped out by a wrestler. This all happened at 170 pounds. Regardless, George St. Pierre undoubtedly is the best fighter in the world at welterweight division. Most people have him at number 2 or number 3 in the pound-for-pound ranking systems. And basically, he is the prototype for the next level of MMA fighting. Like when kids are like learning jiu-jitsu and wrestling in grade school and boxing and striking and stuff like that, and they try and put it all together, and 20 years from now you've got these new fighters. These guys are going to look like George St. Pierre, in shape, mad cardio, good at everything. That's the kind of guy George St. Pierre is. Obviously, y'all see I'm keeping this even here. I'm not I'm just looking at it straight ahead. All right, Anderson the Spider Silva. Let's talk about this dude. Anderson Silva is a world champion who dominates his opponents with lightning fast strikes, powerful attacks from all limbs, and he's the only fighter in MMA to have finished opponents with punches, elbows, kicks, knees, and submissions. He basically goes on the prowl, and when he's ready, and I say when he's ready because it really is up to him, he attacks and destroys his prey. In his fight against Lieben, he made a statement. Against Franklin, he put an exclamation to that statement. And then in his rematch, he added like a few cuss words. And you know what I mean? He's just a beast. And then, let's say he plays around with his prey like for too long and he doesn't finish them as fast as he should. And, he's playing with his food. Well, what happens is they end up blowing their knee. You know what I mean? That's what happens. He still wins. Against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, he wins by triangles. Against, Olympic class wrestling, he chokes them out. And with the win over Talis, he'll break the record for consecutive wins in the UFC. He'll have 9. He'll also have finished his last 10 fights if he finishes Talis. Right now, he's finished his last 9 fights. He looks almost unbeatable. He breaks your face. When you wake up, you rethink your placement in the division, and some leave altogether, or at least for the time being, like Rich Franklin and Dan Henderson. Just like George St. Pierre, though, he has been got. He was submitted by Ryo Chonin by one of the most ridiculous submissions in the history of MMA. He was subbed by Takasi in a fight where he was actually just kind of on the ground and getting dominated until he finally lost by submission. His first loss was in his first fight to Luis Azeredo back in 2000. And lastly, he holds a disqualification loss to Okami, where he knocked him out from an illegal but nasty upkick. This is all at 185. He had a fight or two at 205. He had the one in the UFC against it don't matter. He busted up dude's eye and knocked him down, knocked him out, and walked away, and it was all in 30 seconds or something like that. Crazy. He has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He trained with Shooter Box, and most people have Anderson the Spider Silva at number 1 or number 2 in the pound-for-pound ranking system. His domination of the middleweight division has been straight up ridiculous. All right, so now we know what kind of beast we're talking about here. And this is not a situation where one guy is a bum and These guys are both at the top of the game in their respective weight classes. All right, what happens if they face each other? Let's break it down. Let's get right down to the physical of it. First of all, Anderson Silva, 6'2". He walks around above 205 pounds. He has a 77.5-inch reach, and he has a very long, lanky, but powerful body. George St. Pierre, 5'10", walks around about 185 pounds. He has a 76-inch reach advantage and is a stocky, wide, and powerful build. In a fight between the two, George St. Pierre said that he would need to put on weight, and then he would need to turn that extra weight into functional muscle. He said just that alone, that little eating and working out and eating and working out, that alone, forget about training, that would take a few extra months, like 3 months, just by itself. So, he said he would need some extra time if this fight were to actually go down. He wants to mirror his body right now at 185, and he recognizes that he can't just put on the weight and show up. Meanwhile, if these guys were to fight, it would be business as usual for Anderson Silva. He'd just weigh in at 185. But the big thing here is after the weigh-in, Anderson Silva would start gaining back his water weight. He'd eat a bunch, and he would walk into the fight around 200 pounds. So, meanwhile, GSP would not gain any weight, as it's not like he cut down to 185, but he actually had to work his way up to 185. So, Anderson Silva at his natural fighting weight would be heavier, taller, with a slightly longer reach advantage. But wait, let's get into the reach advantage. Reach is measured by wingspan. It's not this. It's not like sticking your hands out like the Macarena and you say fingertip to elbow. It's like this. It's wingspan. So you go from one hand to the other all the way across the back. Why am I saying this? Because GSP has a very wide back. The dude has that V situation hooked up. He's got that V, it look good and all that, no homo, you know what I mean? But he's got that V situation, which means his shoulders are very broad. That means that is included in his wingspan. Meanwhile, Anderson Silva, he's got these little teeny back, not teeny ass, I was going to say tiny ass back, but come on, y'all, quit it. He has this tiny thin back. And all of his reach actually comes from his Dalsum-like lanky arms. So the numbers here state that there's a 1.5-inch advantage for Anderson Silva, but in this situation, the numbers do lie. Silva would actually have a near 5-inch height advantage, a significant reach advantage, a 15-pound weight advantage, and now that leaves only one question as who is stronger. All right, George St. Pierre is strong. He is very strong. However, not many people would say that he is physically stronger than Thiago Alves, who is naturally a 185er. He might even be damn naturally a super damn heavyweight that cuts down to 185. That cuts down to 170. Now, I'm not going to talk about MMA math. MMA math is not the way to go. That's like saying, Anderson Silva got tapped by a wrestler who's not as good as George St. Pierre. Therefore, George St. Pierre could tap Anderson Silva. Or George St. Pierre got knocked out by a guy whose hands are not nearly as close to as good as Anderson Silva's. Therefore, Anderson Silva wouldn't. I'm not talking about that. What I'm going to talk about here is MMA relativity. What do I mean by that? We're talking about strength. George St. Pierre is strong, but how strong is he? Anderson Silva is strong, but how strong is he? Let's get down to it. Anderson Silva fights at 185 pounds. At 185, he held his own off his back against Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson is a big 185er who fights at 205 whenever he wants. Dan Henderson, this is the relativity part. I'm not saying MMA math, relativity. Dan Henderson, strength-wise, fought Rampage, who was a huge 205er. They went 25 minutes, and much of it was wrestling. So, relatively, Anderson Silva wrestled with Dan Henderson and held his own. Ended up choking him out. But Dan Henderson has held his own against huge-ass Rampage, who is so strong he's known for deadlifting grown-ass men and dumping them on their heads. Relatively. You see what I'm saying? Henderson could hold his own with Rampage, but against Anderson, he got choked out and couldn't do any damage in the half guard, and he had half guard for a while. He was just putting on these little fake-ass cheesy hammer fists. Now, does anybody other than George St. Pierre's teammates, and by teammates I mean Keith Jardine and Rashad Evans, does anybody else believe that George St. Pierre could actually wrestle with Dan Henderson and not get thrown around like a rag doll? Alright, does anybody actually think George St. Pierre could wrestle with Rampage and not get picked up with one arm? Just like smashed into clay. This got nothing to do with how good George St. Pierre is. This has to do with strength and relative strength. Alright. If you ask people the same question about Anderson Silva, could Anderson Silva wrestle with Rampage in an MMA fight? A lot of people will actually pick Anderson Silva to beat Rampage. See what I'm saying? Does anybody think George St. Pierre could clinch with a very big Rich Franklin? You know what I mean? And just chuck him around like a little boy by the back of his head. Okay? GSP at 185. That's what we're talking about. Now, Anderson Silva literally clinched up with big-ass Rich Franklin and in a battle of strength, literally threw him around the cage. Okay? He literally grabbed him by the back of the head, broke his nose, sent him to the plastic surgeon. Alright? Now, we're talking about Anderson Silva against Dan Henderson and Rich Franklin. Two guys that can fight at 205 at the drop of a dime. Both these guys got out-muscled. Alright? Now, who would say George St. Pierre could ever fight those guys and have similar outcomes? Alright. Who's the toughest guy GSP's ever fought? Obviously, and by tough I mean strongest. BJ Penn is not him, obviously. He's naturally a 155er. When they fought, he was a bloated up 155er both times. What maybe Josh Koscheck, maybe Matt Hughes. I say the strongest guy GSP's ever fought is Matt Hughes. And Matt Hughes didn't go up to, middleweight to try and take on whoever and whatnot. Back in the day, there could have been a fight between Hughes and Franklin. Why not? Why not? You know what I mean? Like I said, it's not about who won, but it's about the relativity. It's about the muscle. Okay? Anderson Silva, straight up, based on, I hope that made sense, because to me it made logical sense, and if it made sense to me, but it actually doesn't make sense, that means I'm insane. Alright, so, Anderson Silva would be the much, much, much stronger fighter, according to that line of thinking I was going with. So, here we go. Strength, height, reach, power, all go to Anderson Silva. Now let's talk about George St. Pierre's greatest weapon, outside of his stamina / cardio, is his wrestling. George St. Pierre, by far, is the best MMA wrestler. Basically, the guy who transitions wrestling the best in the sport of MMA. But now let's just think a little bit outside of this for a second. What would happen if he tried to out-wrestle Cain Velasquez or Shane Carwin or Gabriel Gonzaga? With all of his skill and with all of his abilities, dude would get manhandled. No questions asked. They're just too big for him. Alright? Not because, they're better than him in MMA wrestling, but they're just too damn big. Now, Anderson's not as big as Shane Carwin, Cain Velasquez, or Gabriel Gonzaga, but he falls along the lines, in my mind, as just too damn big. Alright? It's like, against the smaller wrestler, even if the guy's better than you, somebody with really good wrestling prowess will be able to sweep, escape, sprawl, etc., etc. Also, George St. Pierre often sets up his takedowns with strikes. His opponents fear his strikes, and then they get taken down. Or they're worried about the takedown, and then they get beat up. Does anybody think GSP will be able to strike fear into the heart of the best MMA striker on the planet? Like, is Anderson Silva going to be there like, oh man, don't get hit, don't get hit? If he wants to only look for the takedown, he can, because he's got the far better striking, the longer reach, the height advantage, everything. You know what I'm saying? So, so let's say George St. Pierre's out there and he's trying to set up with strikes and it's not working. He's getting tagged up. I mean, what's he gonna do at that point? He's probably gonna have to just shoot in. Okay, now what happens if George St. Pierre doesn't set up his punches and he just goes in for takedowns? Maybe by then or by now he's got a closed up eye, or he's been tapped a few times on the jaw. Now what happens? You know what I mean? He's gonna get straight nastied up. You know what I mean? Also, in a lot of George St. Pierre's fights, after he's thrown the jabs and the hooks and whatever the crosses, he's able to actually just walk up to his opponents and grab them. Like, he literally, like George BJ Penn watched the fight. He'll just walk up and be like, gotcha. Who thinks he can do that to Anderson Silva in any given day? Never, ever. He would have to deal with elbows, knees, fists, legs. He would be in serious trouble. All right. So, you know what I mean? Like, his wrestling advantage would likely be erased, and then that only leaves the other types of disciplines. We've got striking, Anderson Silva. Nobody would think that George St. Pierre has better striking than Anderson Silva. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they're both black belts. Silva got his black belt from Nogueira. So, maybe let's just say even, Let's just say they're even. Let's forget about anything. Just say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's a wash. Stamina has, like I said, George St. Pierre can only be equaled with stamina. Is Anderson Silva going to come in with less stamina? Is he going to come in tired? Is he going to gas in the third? No, he doesn't gas. He's shown throughout history that he doesn't get tired in fights. But I can tell you something, just from my little bit of whatever. It's actually like a year and a half now. That's pretty good. A year and a half of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Whenever I roll with somebody that weighs 20 pounds less than me, it ain't nothing compared to when I'm rolling with somebody that I'm used to, somebody that's big. If I'm on my back and somebody's got side control and they're doing all their whatnot, if they weigh like 200 pounds and I weigh 220 and whatever, and I'm used to like rolling with these big ass dudes, this ain't nothing. I'm not gonna get tired the same way people who are normally smaller than George St. Pierre get tired when he rolls up on Matt Serra and BJ Penn and Parisian or whoever it is, and he's applying that pressure. When he's applying that pressure to those smaller guys, they're getting tired. Like, oh my God, he's so damn big, he's so strong. All types of whatever. It's not going to happen with somebody that's bigger. You know what I mean? I think it's very obvious, where I've gone here. Not even where I'm going. The point is size matters. If there's anything George St. Pierre versus BJ Penn 1 and 2, especially 2, could have shown us, is that when you're dealing with world-class fighters, sometimes the biggest difference is just sheer size. Now, if GSP was naturally a walk-around guy at 205, and then he had to cut down to 185, and that's naturally his weight class, well, this is a different story altogether, because now we've got a guy that's just beastly strong, very powerful, blah, 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 and everything you can get into it. But that's not the case. We're talking about a guy who has to put on, 15 pounds of muscle. Not 15 pounds, 15 pounds of functional muscle. All right, now let's get into a few, bad arguments. I'm only going to get into 2. There are going to be some people out there that say Anderson Silva got taken down by Travis Lutter. Okay, well, let's get that out of the way. Anderson Silva had a bad knee, first of all. But then they also want to forget the fact that after he got taken down by Travis Lutter is much bigger than GSP. After he got taken down by Lutter, he swept him, stood up, ended the round, telling Lutter, get up, and then went down, taken down again, and choked him in the triangle. You know what I mean? He won that fight. Also, that's like MMA math. MMA math sucks. MMA math says Vanderlei Silva beat Rampage. Rampage beat Chuck. Therefore, Vanderlei Silva beats Chuck. And we all know that that's not how it works. All right. Um, GSP is the best guy in the world at 170. Period. All right. But at 185, against a better striker who was bigger, taller, longer, stronger, and I didn't even get into it, but faster, and he is faster. Okay. You know, what could he do other than shoot for takedowns? GSP is not going to strike with Anderson Silva, not even for 20 seconds. So, again, George St. Pierre is the best fighter at 170 in the entire world. But against Anderson Silva, he would literally become one-dimensional. All right? Now, although I would like to see this fight, I don't believe there is much intrigue in what would happen. It's not like ooh, who's gonna win? What? I feel more strongly about the outcome of this fight if it were to happen than I did George St. Pierre versus BJ Penn 2, which I basically called like I come back from the future from after seeing the fight and then acted like I didn't and then basically said round for round. Anyways, I don't think this is a good fight for George St. Pierre. I don't think his trainers, his manager, or himself should even take the fight. I think that he needs to worry about 170 and just handling everybody at 170. I'm not saying he is worried about Anderson Silva or 185. I'm just saying, keep focused. 170, you're the man. Handle it. He does not need to worry about 185. I don't think Anderson Silva is even interested in this fight based on the interviews that I've seen on the internet and firsthand. Now, if this fight actually does happen, Anderson the Spider Silva, brutal knockout within 3 minutes of the first round. MMA, y'all. It's important. Peace.